Welcome back to our channel, where we bring you the most exclusive and deeply analyzed updates from the glamorous, high-stakes world of daytime television. Today is a truly spectacular day to dive into the intricate web of passion, betrayal, and corporate warfare that defines our favorite Los Angeles fashion dynasties. The tension has reached an absolute boiling point, and the fallout from the latest explosive confrontation is guaranteed to leave you entirely breathless. Grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and let us unpack the monumental tragedy that has just struck the very heart of the Forrester family. The pristine, gleaming catwalk at Forrester Creations headquarters has long been a symbol of artistic triumph. A sacred space where the most breathtaking haute couture designs are unveiled to the world. It is a place of beauty, elegance, and legacy. However, the atmosphere inside the sprawling executive building has recently morphed from a sanctuary of high fashion into a suffocating, volatile war zone. The deeply entrenched animosity between the Forrester and Spencer families has been steadily escalating, poisoning the air and turning colleagues into bitter adversaries. This toxic environment finally reached its devastating climax right on the very runway that was meant to showcase the future of the company, transforming a space of creative brilliance into a stage for primal, unbridled violence. R.J. Forrester, the golden boy and heir apparent to the design legacy, was meticulously preparing his highly anticipated new collection. The pressure mounting on R.J.'s young shoulders was already immense, compounded by the desperate need to prove his worth in the shadow of his legendary grandfather, Eric Forrester, and his incredibly demanding father, Ridge. But beyond the professional stress, R.J. was consumed by a dark, festering jealousy and a bruised ego. His recent physical altercation at the bikini bar with Will Spencer had left him with bruised ribs and a deeply wounded pride. R.J.'s obsession with Electra Forrester and his fury over her reconciliation with Will had twisted his focus, turning his creative drive into a vindictive crusade to assert his dominance over the Spencer heir. Will Spencer, carrying the fiery, unapologetic arrogance of his father, Bill Spencer, walked into the Forrester headquarters with a chip on his shoulder that was visible from a mile away. The accumulated resentment between the two young men was a ticking time bomb. Will felt entirely justified in his disdain for R.J., viewing him as a pampered, entitled nepotism baby who had weaponized his family name to manipulate Electra and sabotage Will's career. The psychological warfare that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks finally erupted when Will and R.J. crossed paths near the catwalk. The verbal jabs were vicious, cutting deep into their respective insecurities. Will's brutal humiliation of R.J., reminding him of his perceived inadequacies and questioning his true standing as a Forrester man, was the spark that ignited the powder keg. The confrontation escalated with terrifying speed, shattering the refined quiet of the design studio. Words were no longer enough to express the profound hatred they harbored for one another. R.J., blinded by a blinding, irrational rage over the insults hurled at him, lunged at Will. The physical altercation that ensued was violent, reckless, and entirely devoid of the sophistication expected within the walls of Forrester Creations. Fists flew, knocking over expensive lighting equipment and tearing through racks of priceless, meticulously crafted silk and chiffon garments. The two young men grappled fiercely, their grunts of exertion and shouts of anger echoing through the cavernous room, a horrifying display of toxic masculinity and unresolved trauma unleashed upon the very symbol of the Forrester legacy. It was in this chaotic, destructive moment that Ridge Forrester entered the room. The patriarch of the Forrester family, a man who had dedicated his entire life to building and protecting this empire, was frozen in absolute horror. Before his eyes, his biological son, R.J., and a young man he had watched grow up, Will Spencer, were tearing each other apart like mortal enemies. The sight was a visceral, agonizing manifestation of everything Ridge had been desperately trying to prevent. The corporate civil war, the the fractured family loyalties, the relentless battle between his wife Brooke and his daughter Steffi. It had all trickled down to poison the next generation. The heavy, suffocating burden of leadership and paternal responsibility crashed down upon Ridge with the force of a tidal wave. Summoning every ounce of his commanding presence, Ridge rushed forward, his booming voice cutting through the sounds of the scuffle. He attempted to use his profound paternal authority to physically and emotionally separate the two brawling boys. He grabbed their shoulders, his voice cracking with a mixture of desperate authority and profound heartbreak, demanding that they stop this senseless destruction. But the boys were entirely deaf to reason. RJ, consumed by the agonizing humiliation of Will's taunts and the physical pain of his previously bruised ribs, was lost in a red haze of fury. Will, fueled by the defensive, aggressive instincts inherited from the Spencer bloodline, refused to back down. The struggle continued, wild and uncontrollable, completely overpowering Ridge's desperate attempts to restore peace. As Ridge struggled to pull them apart, the emotional agony of witnessing his family tear itself to shreds became too much to bear. His heart clenched with a sudden, agonizing pain that stole the breath from his lungs. The sheer disappointment, the overwhelming stress of the ongoing corporate crisis, and the terrifying realization that his family was fractured beyond repair culminated in a catastrophic physical failure. Ridge staggered backward, his hands desperately clutching his chest as a wave of paralyzing agony radiated through his body. The world around him began to blur, the angry shouts of RJ and Will fading into a muffled, distorted echo as his cardiovascular system buckled under the immense, unbearable strain of the moment. The collapse was sudden and deeply traumatic. Ridge Forrester, the towering pillar of strength for both his family and his global fashion empire, fell heavily onto the polished surface of the catwalk. The sickening thud of his body hitting the floor instantly silenced the room. The transition from violent rage to absolute, paralyzing terror was instantaneous. RJ and Will froze, their fists dropping to their sides as the horrifying reality of what their petty, vindictive hatred had just caused washed over them. The runway, which was supposed to be the launching pad for RJ's triumphant new collection, had tragically transformed into the site of his father's catastrophic medical emergency. Panic immediately erupted within the headquarters. The frantic screams for help, the desperate calls to emergency services, and the chaotic rush of security personnel painted a scene of utter devastation. RJ fell to his knees beside his father, his previous anger entirely evaporating, replaced by a suffocating, crushing guilt. He pleaded with his father to wake up, his hands trembling as he witnessed Ridge's pale, lifeless face. Will stood in stunned silence, the gravity of the situation anchoring him to the floor. The flashing red and blue lights of the arriving ambulances soon reflected off the glass facade of the Forrester building, signaling a dark, uncertain new chapter for everyone involved. The transition from the vibrant, chaotic design studio to the sterile, terrifyingly quiet halls of the intensive care unit was a jarring, emotional whiplash. Ridge Forrester was rushed into emergency surgery, his life hanging precariously in the balance. When the dust settled, the grim prognosis was delivered. Ridge had suffered a massive cardiac event and had slipped into a deep, unresponsive coma. The rhythmic, mechanical beeping of the life support machines was the only sound in the dimly lit hospital room, a constant, terrifying reminder of his fragility. The Forrester family gathered in the waiting area, their faces etched with profound grief, shock, and a terrifying sense of helplessness as they prayed for a miracle. Steffi Forrester Finnegan arrived at the hospital like a force of nature, her initial panic and heartbreak quickly hardening into a cold, impenetrable shell of absolute ruthlessness. Seeing her beloved father, the invincible Ridge Forrester, lying unconscious and dependent on machines, triggered a profound psychological shift within her. Steffi's grief did not manifest as despair. It mutated into a blinding, unyielding rage. She needed a target for her agonizing pain, and she found it in the ongoing, toxic presence of the Spencer family within her company. Steffi rationalized that this tragedy was not merely an accident. It was the direct, unavoidable consequence of allowing the Spencer poison to infiltrate Forrester Creations. In Steffi's mind, the narrative was crystal clear. While Spencer's arrogance, his violent tendencies, and his relentless provocation of RJ were the direct catalysts that pushed her father's heart to the breaking point. She viewed Will not just as an insubordinate employee, but as a literal threat to her family's survival. The fierce, protective instincts that defined Steffi's leadership style went into absolute overdrive. She convinced herself that as long as Will Spencer remained a part of Forrester Creations, her family would never be safe. The emotional trauma of seeing her father in a coma stripped away any remaining shred of corporate diplomacy or empathy she might have harbored. Leaving the hospital with a steely, terrifying resolve, Steffi returned to the Forrester Creations executive office. The building felt empty and haunted without Ridge's presence, but Steffi was not there to mourn. She was there to execute a brutal, definitive cleansing of her company. Sitting behind the heavy mahogany desk, she made a ruthless, unilateral decision that would send shockwaves through the fashion industry. She did not wait for her father to wake up. She did not consult with human resources or consider the potential legal ramifications. Driven by a volatile cocktail of grief, vengeance, and a desperate need to regain control, Steffi drafted the official termination papers. The air inside the sleek, glass-paneled executive offices of Forrester Creations has been thick with a palpable, suffocating tension for days. Steffi Forrester Finnegan, a woman whose corporate instincts are as sharp as the haute couture she champions, has been pacing the floors with a mind consumed by relentless suspicion. When Hope Logan Spencer abruptly announced that she was taking a sudden break from the company, citing the endless delays and frustrations surrounding her hope for the future line, the explanation never sat right with the Forrester co-CEO. Steffi's intuition, deeply honed by years of bitter boardroom battles and a generational family rivalry, screamed that there was a far more sinister and calculated maneuver playing out beneath the surface. She outright refused to accept that her longtime rival would simply walk away without a fight, and that gnawing, persistent doubt has finally driven her to take drastic matters into her own hands. Driven by an insatiable, burning need for the absolute truth, Steffi transforms from a polished corporate executive into a relentless, stealthy investigator. The bustling, sun-drenched streets of Los Angeles blur past her as she discreetly trails Hope's vehicle through the winding city roads, her dark eyes fixed intensely on the car ahead. The journey takes her far from the familiar, aristocratic elegance of the Forrester estate and straight into the beating heart of the enemy's territory, the aggressively modern, heavily fortified headquarters of the newly minted Logan brand. As Steffi parks her car in the shadows and watches Hope slip seamlessly through the heavily guarded glass doors, a chilling, vindicating realization washes over her. The puzzle pieces violently snap together in her mind. Hope is not seeking solace, nor is she taking a mental health retreat. She is actively conspiring with the very people who are meticulously plotting Forrester Creations' ultimate downfall. The atmosphere inside the Logan headquarters is electric, buzzing with the frantic, creative energy of a brand preparing to launch a massive, devastating strike against an industry titan. Steffi, utilizing her formidable presence and sheer, unapologetic audacity, bypasses the reception area and navigates the labyrinthine corridors of the rival fashion house. Her heart pounds a rhythmic, deafening drumbeat of impending vindication and absolute fury against her ribs. Every step she takes closer to the executive design suites feels like a step toward a catastrophic point of no return. The pristine white walls and bold Logan branding serve as a stark, infuriating reminder of the existential threat this new company poses, a threat that is about to become painfully, irreversibly personal for the Forrester family. When Steffi finally breaches the heavy, frosted double doors of the primary design studio, The scene that unfolds before her is nothing short of a waking nightmare for the Forrester heiress. Bathed in the stark, unforgiving light of the studio, Hope Logan is leaning over a massive drafting table, her eyes alight with a fierce, liberated passion that Steffy has not seen in her for months. Beside her stands Deke Sharp, the brilliant designer Hope had previously been forced to let go, now passionately sketching out the blueprints of a collection explicitly designed to annihilate Forrester's market share. And standing over them both, casting a long, predatory shadow of approval and immense financial backing, is the ultimate orchestrator of this massive betrayal, the ruthless billionaire, Bill Spencer. The stunned silence in the room shatters the moment Steffy's designer heels click aggressively against the hardwood floor, announcing her furious, uninvited arrival. The shock on Hope's face is instantaneous, a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated panic before it rapidly hardens into a mask of cold, calculated defiance. Steffy does not hold back for a single second, unleashing a torrential downpour of venomous accusations that echo violently off the studio walls. She brands Hope a traitor, a deceitful, ungrateful manipulator who used a fabricated mental health break as a cowardly smokescreen to defect to the enemy. The confrontation is visceral, crackling with decades of unresolved, toxic animosity between the Forrester and Logan women. Steffy's voice trembles with a potent, terrifying mixture of rage and triumph, her darkest suspicions violently validated in the most devastating way possible. Hope, however, refuses to cower or shrink under Steffy's blistering, relentless assault. Stepping out from behind the drafting table, Hope meets Steffy's furious glare with an icy, unwavering resolve that signifies a permanent, monumental shift in their dynamic. For years, Hope has felt marginalized, her creative vision suffocated under Steffy's condescending leadership and relentless, single-minded prioritization of the haute couture lines. Now, standing in the heart of the Logan empire, surrounded by people who value her worth, Hope unleashes her own pent-up, righteous frustrations. She boldly declares her independence, stating with absolute conviction that she will no longer be treated as a second-class citizen in a company that her own mother helped build and sustain. The psychological shackles have been broken, and Hope embraces her new identity as the crown jewel of the Logan brand, unapologetic and fiercely empowered. But Steffy Forrester is not a woman who allows insubordination to go unpunished, especially when it directly threatens her family's legacy and financial supremacy. With a chillingly calm demeanor that completely belies her internal inferno, Steffy drops a legal hammer that threatens to instantly obliterate Hope's newfound sanctuary. She explicitly, maliciously reminds Hope of the ironclad, highly restrictive non-compete clause embedded deep within her Forrester Creations contract. Steffy threatens to unleash a relentless battalion of corporate lawyers to sue Hope into utter oblivion, promising to tie up her new designs, her entire career, and the financial future of the Logan brand in years of grueling, ruinous litigation. The threat hangs heavy and toxic in the air, a lethal corporate weapon designed to paralyze Hope's creative renaissance before it can even take its first breath. The moment the threat of a massive lawsuit leaves Steffy's lips, Bill Spencer steps forward, his physical presence radiating the dangerous, cutthroat energy of a corporate shark smelling blood in the water. Bill is absolutely not about to let his multi-million-dollar investment and his grand, sweeping vision for the Logan empire be derailed by Steffy